Today we have Professor Sasheej Hegde with us. As he said, he doesn't believe in much formalities. But as a part of courtesy, let me put a brief introduction about Professor Sasheej Hegde. Professor Sasheej Hegde is a professor in the Department of Sociology, University of Hyderabad, where he has been teaching since 1998. He handles the core teaching on issues of sociological theory. His research has ranged broadly over questions in the sociology of knowledge and disciplinary history, also the interpretation of modernity and the critical recuperations of normative political languages. He has published fairly extensively on these areas. His current work has sought to actively cultivate agenda on law, ethics, and constitutional jurisprudence, precisely on philosophy of social science. Today he will deliver two lectures. First lecture will be on hermeneutics, and second will be on idea of explanatory critique. And he will also have an interaction with us today afternoon after your presentations. So it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Sasheej Hegde to the Kerala State Higher Education Council and also to this workshop on methodology and research writing.
Okay, it's always nice to be here and in Kerala in particular, because I also come from a region which is kind of close to Kerala, Bangalore, South Canara side. So I always have a deep affinity for the Canara coast to which I belong. So Kerala is as much part of the Canara coast as anything else. So it's really nice to be here. And the first lecture is, I've given it a broad title, so and I like to work with titles, and it will give you a sense of what I am trying to do. The first, there's a pen? Yeah, the first lecture, I've broadly titled it of hermeneutics and contextualized self interpretations. This is the title of my first talk, of hermeneutics and contextualized self-interpretations. And I generally give it specifying limits. That's the first. And the second, which will be the second part of my lecture, which has some connection with some of my remarks that I make here, and will be on the idea of explanatory critique. Extending the contours. And these are the two broad themes of my lectures, and I think the titles are sufficiently indicative of what I'm trying to do. The subtitle is specifying what I'm trying to do with that theme. Extending the contours is also trying to do, explicating what I'm trying to do with the theme. It also, I think the two themes also seem, the kind of social science, I'm told the audience comprises people from various disciplines. In fact, one of the speakers was saying a lot of the speakers prior to this was from economics. So hopefully you'll hear something different. I'm a non-economics person. I teach sociology at the University of Hyderabad. Although the kind of training that I inculcate in students is something which has to have a more impact of history, philosophy on social science itself, right? So if you want to have a better understanding, I also was told that there is a humanities program under the Kerala Higher Education Council, and they also have workshops of this kind, right? So somewhere you have a social science workshop and you have a humanities workshop. I mean, one can begin to think that difference, but what I'm trying to say is the remarks that I'm making here could as well be made in a humanities workshop as well, right? So somewhere I'm speaking of a more humanities-inspired social science than something outside of humanities which could inspire social science. So I'm talking of a humanities-centered social science. So the themes are reflective of that, okay? Let me begin with the first theme about. Now, I'm not going to give you a long lecture. I think want to pose certain issues for you on this theme as part of a humanities-centered social science, okay? And how a humanities-centered social science might have to get into questions about actors, agents, meanings, interpretations, and so on, right? And the next theme is social science or a humanities-centered social science concerned only with actors, meanings, self-interpretations? Is there more to a humanities-centered social science than that? That's why the idea of explanatory critique, right? And feel free to I'm just kind of warming up, so feel free to interrupt me whenever you want, and if there are any clarifications, please feel free to sound me out. Okay, so let me start. With what is this tradition called as hermeneutics, right? I mean, insofar as contemporary social science is concerned, there are a lot of hermeneutic approaches to social science, hermeneutic interpretive approaches, including intellectual history, the history of ideas, the study of political cultures, institutions, the analysis of public policy, okay, the study of international relations, as indeed the study of ideologies, discourses, media representations, and so on. So somewhere hermeneutic approaches to social science have been used to understand a variety of topics, right? So in a sense, what I'm representing for you, despite the disciplinary divisions. In fact, I don't see a sociologist talking to a historian interdisciplinarity. A sociologist talking to a physicist, that I think is interdisciplinarity. I think history, social science perhaps are part of neighborly disciplines, and neighbors have a certain interdimension which is quite important. Now, as with any other tradition of thought, hermeneutics has a very complex history, right? But as a tradition of thought, at least in Western history, it comes in the context of the reading of texts, reading of especially scriptural texts, right? And hermeneutics as a kind of a discipline, insofar as the West is concerned, emerged especially in the context of reading scriptural traditions, scriptural texts, and which gained a new currency in the context of the Renaissance and the Reformation in Europe and so on. But in its more modern manifestations, contemporary manifestations, hermeneutics gets to be associated with the writings of this thinker, Wilhelm Dilthey, right? Wilhelm Dilthey, who himself was drawing on other German traditions that were available to him. Now, I'm not going to get into a history, I'll soon get into it, but I think it's important to get some background about what is the context in which hermeneutic approaches begin to take off. Then you have also other writers like Martin Heidegger, okay, Gadamer, etc., as well as more contemporary thinkers like Paul Ricoeur, Charles Taylor, Hubert Dreyfus, and others, who all of these writers try to extend the writings of their predecessors and extend it to the social sciences, right? So what is emanating in the study in philosophy and in theology as a certain tradition of reading texts gets extended to the social sciences as well, right? Etc. Now, one of the important ideas central to hermeneutics is the idea of contextualized self-interpretations, right? And this focus on contextualized self-interpretations is also evident in other thinkers as well, apart from the ones that I have already named, who adopt certain analytical styles of reasoning, such as, for instance, Isaiah Berlin, or Peter Winch, or Stuart Hampshire, as indeed a more contemporary figure like Bernard Williams, right? In philosophy, many of these are in philosophy, but engage with philosophy with historical concerns. Fascinating kind of work that some of these people do, right? Now, having just introduced the theme of hermeneutics and contextualized self-interpretations, I'm of course going to concentrate on one contemporary figure. I'm not going to, because then the discussion becomes a lot more focused. I will look at the idea of hermeneutics extended to the social sciences in the writings of Charles Taylor, right? And I think Charles Taylor is an exceedingly exemplary figure to concentrate. I mean, his work itself has traversed entirety of domains, and the kind of contemporary work that he's doing is about secularism, about the emphasis on language, and so on. His latest book is on the idea of language that comes from the German tradition of Humboldt and others. Okay, so I will, although I've named many of these figures, I'm going to concentrate only on some of the ideas emanating about hermeneutics and contextualized self-interpretation, because there's something interesting in what Taylor reminds us about contextualized self-interpretations. Now, one key feature of the hermeneutic model for the social sciences, as indeed for the humanities, is to privilege the role of language, okay, and meaning as central to the experience of actors, right? That's why, for instance, when Charles Taylor emphasizes the role of language and meaning in mediating the experiences of actors, he draws on some of the figures that I have named, Heidegger, and more particularly Gadamer, okay, to emphasize the centrality of meaning and interpretation in social science, right? He also claims, Taylor claims, that if meaning is central to social science, then human beings or human agents that are studied by social science have to be approached as what he calls self-defining or self-interpreting animals, right? Or self-interpreting beings. I mean, we don't like the word animals to be referring to us, but come to think of it, we are also one species of animal, right? And so on. Okay, but if people have some diffidence about this word animal to refer to us, etc., maybe you can substitute it by the word being or agent. So as self-defining, self-interpreting agents, right, etc. Now, in fact, if somebody wants to read more on Charles Taylor, I mean, there is his book called Philosophy and the Human Sciences. This was published in 1985, which is called, there are 2 volumes of his writings. Of his early writings, which is part of his philosophical papers, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 2 is called Philosophy and the Human Sciences, and Volume 1 is Human Agency and Language, right? And some of the essays that I'm drawing on are in these two books. But the titles themselves are reflective of the theme, Philosophy and the Human Sciences and Human Agency and Language, right? Now, I think it's important for us to once you define actors as self-defining actors or self-defining, self-interpreting beings, okay, what it means is that changes in the self-definition that actors give, okay, have a bearing on an understanding of what they are, right? So how they look at themselves has a bearing on how what they do, their ideas about themselves, and so on, and how human beings and their actions are to be understood, right? So Taylor makes this point. Charles Taylor. Okay. Charles Taylor makes this point that insofar as social science explanations are concerned, the norm of social science explanation, okay, and especially a social science explanation which is modeled on hermeneutics, right? So because you can have a social science explanation which is not modeled on hermeneutics, right? You can model social science explanations on natural science. You can model social science explanations on, say more on historical modes and so on, right? But if you want the norm of explanation in social science modeled on hermeneutics is one which tries to make sense of behavior, right? Okay. In other words, making sense of behavior. Right? Now, some of these are very crude and simple points, but we will soon start complicating this terrain, right? To making sense, okay, that meaning has the meaning that actors give to their actions has a certain coherence, okay, and this coherence of meaning that underlies action is what social science must aspire to explain, so to say, right? That's why, according to Taylor, making sense, okay, is to give an interpretation. To make sense of some action is to provide an interpretation, okay, and an interpretation in social science, or at least a social science modeled on hermeneutics, okay, should meet three conditions, okay. In fact, he argues a science, in fact he uses the word, a science of interpretation, okay, must model itself on three conditions, right? So if you have to make sense of action through meaning, okay, therefore have a science of interpretation, there are three conditions that must be met. First condition is with reference to what is being interpreted, okay, we can speak of its sense or coherence, right? There is something that is being interpreted, right? Okay, now that something which is being interpreted is seen to have some sense or coherence. This is the first condition, right? That there is something valuable in that which you are trying to interpret, something valuable in that which you are trying to make sense of. Okay, that's the first condition. That the second, according to Taylor, is that this sense, okay, can be expressed in another form, right? Because you are interpreting an action, right? If you're interpreting an action, right, then you are rendering an action in another form, because actors may interpret their actions, they may also give meaning to their actions, but the analyst, the interpreter, is interpreting that action which an actor performs, right? So the first condition is with reference to what is being interpreted, that it has sense and coherence. And the second is that this sense can be expressed in another form, okay, so that we can say that an interpretation gives a clearer expression, okay, of that, of what is only implicit, in the original meaning, right? So actors give meaning to their actions, and then somebody, an observer or an analyst or a social scientist, interprets that action. So, and that interpretation is assumed to be giving a better sense of that action, both to the actor and to others, right? So that's the second condition of a norm of explanation in the social sciences, which is modeled on hermeneutics. Okay, and third, okay, that this sense, is for a subject, right? So that meaning that you're trying to interpret has sense. There is some coherence in it. This coherence is being rendered not only for the actor but also for others. And the third, that meaning or this sense is for a subject. Okay. Although, please note, we know in humanities-centered debates, the question of the subject is a very problematic question. Okay, who or what is the subject is a very interesting and also a very deeply challenging question. But let's suspend that for the moment and just try to ask that these three conditions, that something is meaningful for a subject, for a human actor, right? And that human actor could also be an analyst. The analyst is also a human actor, right? So the third condition is that this sense, the interpretation, this meaning that you're trying to make coherence of is for a subject. Although the question of the subject is perhaps a very problematical question. Okay, that's why these three conditions, according to Taylor, must be met. Okay, if you want to call social science hermeneutical, right? So hermeneutical social science, okay, must be built around these three conditions. Now, this is quite simple. Just 1 minute. This is quite simple, but now we will soon complicate this terrain, which Taylor himself seeks to do. Yeah, please.
Please explain. Please explain.
Yeah. The third one is about for a subject. Who's the actor? The actor is also a see, the notion of the subject is an agent, right? Now the agent, or it could be a human actor. So the subject, when you say it is that this meaning is for a subject, the social scientist who studies is also a subject. Is also an actor like other actors. Although a social science actor is a different kind of actor from regular actors, right? I mean, regular actors may not try to make sense of their behavior in trying to explain it. They don't need to explain their behavior to themselves. They act, so to say. Okay, but when they're trying to explain their behavior to others, right? Then somewhere along the way, those others may not be social scientists, right? So when you talk of meaning in the hermeneutic model, you're talking of meaning for a subject, right? The subject could be myself, other actors, as indeed an observer of the action, okay, or an analyst of the action, or a theorist of the action, okay, etc. Does that clarify? Okay. Yeah.
No, I'm not sure about the difference between second and third sense. In the second sense also, the one is explaining your...
No. So that's why the doubts are precisely the point that I indicated, that the question of the subject is a problematic question, right? So some of the doubts that you're expressing are clearly indicative that the question of the subject, right? See, you're right, you're saying there is a primary level. You can have an action at the primary level. I am the actor, assume I am the actor, and I am acting, right? That's a primary action, right? Then there is somebody, there is a second person in relation to whom I act, okay? My action is directed at somebody else's action. And there is a third person, an observer, right? Etc. So somewhere along the way, in fact, there are always, the action can have a first person reference, it can have a second person reference that is directed at others, and it can also have a third person reference as somebody who's observing that action, right? So when Taylor makes the point that the sense that is sought to be made of is always for a subject. The subject can be the primary actor, it can be the secondary actor, or it can even be the third person, and so on. Although, please note, what is the relationship between primary actors, secondary actors, or primary and secondary actors on one hand, and third person on the other is also an interesting question. And I think we will soon engage with that order of questioning. Now, I also think, I think some of these, I mean, many of these are very simple points, but I think, most of us clog our brains with too many things, too many theories, too many concepts, too many, clutter of ideas. And somewhere it's important, in fact, some of the kind of work that I'm now beginning to do with students, and I love engaging with students, is to actually think about inquiry not as content, but as form. Okay? Inquiry always has a form. A question, when you raise a question, the way you raise a question indicates, okay, or suggests a certain line of approaching the question and also answering it. You had something? The second person.
Second category.
Yeah.
Second condition.
Second condition. The object being.
Oh, second condition.
What is it?
No, the second condition is that, see, you have an action, you have a meaning of the action, then you interpret that action, right? Now, when you interpret that action, you're giving a better sense of the meaning of that action, right? Etc. That's why the second condition is that interpretation gives greater coherence to what is a coherent already. Actors have an understanding of their action, right? No, we will see. You can ask a question, how much actors are aware of their actions? We'll ask that question later. For the moment, let's assume that there is some understanding of the action by the actor, right? Then you are trying to interpret that action. Now, when you interpret that action, actors also interpret their actions. Actors also can interpret their actions, but their interpretation can imply one level of coherence or sense. But when somebody else interprets that action, the assumption is, or the presumption is, that there is greater there is greater sense. An interpretation adds to the meaning of an action. Okay, that's the presumption. How valid it is, we will see as we go along, right? Any other doubts? Yeah.
So in the first condition, the actor is the person. In the second condition,
No. See, the point is, yeah. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. No. I don't think. See, I don't think we need to presume. See, the point is, I only brought that level of 3 levels of the primary actor, the secondary actor, and the third person first person, second person, third person, just to clarify the idea that was there. I don't think anything of the three conditions is contingent on it. It could be anybody. No, it could be, the point is that let's assume that in any situation, all three levels of reference are involved. Right? Then there may be a primary actor, the first person, the second person, and the third person. Right? Let's assume that it is built into the interpretive situation, as it were. Right? And so where the third person is not involved. Very true. Very true. There can be a situation where the third person, as somebody who is observer, is not involved, right? But we are. I mean, I'm talking to a social science audience, so we are assuming that the third person is keen on understanding what is going on, right? Etc. Okay. Now, so these three conditions, according to Taylor, must be met. If human agents and their actions, are amenable to hermeneutical explanation, right? So if you have to have an explanation of the hermeneutical kind, these three conditions have to be met. Now, having set the terms, let us proceed further. So please note, some of these issues that Taylor is highlighting for us has to do with the idea that human beings are self-interpreting kind of beings, right? But then Taylor is making a further point that actions, because you are a self-interpreting being, right? Your actions are meaningful to you and to others, etc. Now the question is not only that human beings are self-interpreting beings. The equally important question for social science, model and hermeneutic is that how interpretations themselves demand interpretations, right? Etc. So let us look. I mean, and I think the idea that interpretations require further interpretations is implicit in the three conditions, that we have outlined. So one part of Taylor's program in trying to think about social science in the hermeneutic mold is to draw attention to the fact that human beings are self-interpreting beings, and secondly, on the ways in which these interpretations themselves demand interpretation, right? Etc. I mean, what are the implications? Because somebody can always ask, we are all, hermeneutics is just preoccupied with the actor. There is also a world that the actor belongs to that also has to be explored, right? So if you're focusing on self-interpretations and interpreting interpretations, where is the world that the actor belongs to that has to be addressed, right? As it were. So what are the implications of using self-interpretations to understand or explain the socio-historical world, right? That's important. So in other words, what are the conditions for interpreting self-interpretations, right? And in fact, in the second volume of his philosophical papers, he has a wonderful essay called Understanding and Ethnocentricity, right? And I think it was written back in the 70s and 80s, and I think it still is important. Look at the title of the essay, Understanding and Ethnocentricity. Now, what is to be ethnocentric? To look at the world from your viewpoint, right? To judge everybody from your viewpoint. To be ethnocentric is to see the world from a particular viewpoint, right? You see to be, so when you say somebody is being ethnocentric, you're saying that you're looking at the world from your viewpoint, right? Etc. Now, surely you're justified in looking at the world from your viewpoint, but surely there are other questions come up when you try to use your viewpoint, and on the basis of that view other viewpoints, judge other viewpoints from the point of view of how much they cohere with your viewpoint, as it were. So what are the issues of understanding that come up? And I think it's important that we address it. So the three conditions of a social science modeled on hermeneutics, okay, must also engage with the question of the interpretation of interpretations, right? Okay, and what are the issues involved in interpreting self-interpretations, right? Incidentally, this could be a lesson for actors themselves. I mean, not just for observers. The primary actor also could gain from this discussion. Okay, not just social scientists. So maybe I should be speaking to the wider world and not just to the social science community. Okay, but of course I don't have those illusions about speaking to the wider world. But I think I have I think I can speak to my own community of social scientists as you all belong to. Okay, now, according to Taylor, okay. An interpretive social science, okay, requires that we master the agent's self-interpretation. Okay, in fact, he uses, and I think he uses. There are some technical words that I want to use, and I think what I'm going to speak, I didn't want to introduce it in the beginning because if I use those technical words, people would kind of say, oh, where are we going, etc. See, most of us social scientists need to be sensitive to this, and I think the remark I'm making now has a bearing on my second lecture as well. What is to be explained and what is doing the explaining, right? And most of the time, most of us social scientists tend to confuse the two, right? What is to be explained and what is doing the explaining, right? Etc. I mean, in technical philosophy of social science or in philosophy of science, the idea of, there is this idea of explanandum, okay, and explanans. Okay, explanandum, what is to be explained? That which is to be explained. Explanans, that which is doing the explaining, right? To explain something, there is a set of arguments that you make to explain something. That is the explanans, right? Now, I think most of us, consciously or unconsciously, confuse the explanans and the explanandum. And particularly in an age of identity politics, as it is our age today, I think this confusion is even more palpable, right? But I think it's so. There is something that has to be explained. There is some fact of the world that has to be explained, right? And there is a way you go about explaining it. That's the way you go about explaining it is the explanans. Okay, explanandum, right? Okay, is that which is to be explained, right? Now, Taylor's point is, that now how do we go about interpreting interpretations, right? That's the challenge for us. And for Taylor, hermeneutics has to do with self-interpretations, but he argues these self-interpretations have to be contextualized. That's why the title, Contextualized Self-Interpretations, right? Now, what does it mean to contextualize self-interpretations, right? So, what I'm remarking now as implications on that theme. Now, the first point that Taylor makes is that an interpretive social science that requires that we master the agent's self-description in order to identify that which is to be explained. Right? Okay? So in other words, in fact, if the agent's self-interpretation, okay, is that which, why is that person interpreting the world that way? Why is X investing that meaning on his or her action? Right? Okay, so you find some meaning being invested in that action. Okay? As a social scientist, you're interested in understanding why that meaning is being invested in that action, right? Etc. That's why Taylor makes the point that interpretive social science requires that we master the agent's self-interpretations or self-description in order to identify the explanandum, okay, that which is to be explained. Okay. Now, in fact, Taylor's point is that while we try to interpret self-descriptions, okay, it is not. We should be careful that in explaining those self-interpretations, we don't use the same language of those self-interpretations. If you use the same language of those self-interpretations, then you're confusing the explanandum and the explanans. Right? So there is something extra that the social scientist is doing in interpreting actions. Right? I mean, for instance, when you're exploring an identity, when you are exploring a claim to an identity, you cannot explain the claim to an identity by an explanation which just explains, which tries to explain that identity claim through the identity itself, through that identity. Because people have this identity, they are making those claims, right? So you use the identity to explain that identity itself. That's circular. No, in other words, what is important for a social scientist would be how people take on that identity. Okay, what are the other identities available to them that they could take on, but they choose to take this. So to interpret an identity claim, you have to understand the context in which that identity claim gets to be asserted and affirmed and taken on. Okay, that's why Taylor points out that an interpretive social science requires that we master the agent's self-interpretation in order to identify what we are trying to explain, the explanandum. But in trying to explain that, we should not use the same language, okay, of that self-interpretation to explain that self-interpretation. Right? To explain identity, you cannot endorse that identity. You cannot use an identity to explain an identity. Right? You will have to actually ask this question: what are the other identities that are available to the actors which they don't take on, etc. So there is something extra that a social scientist is doing. Okay, that's why Taylor points out, okay, and this is important, okay, that the interpretive approach, okay, demands, okay, that we go beyond the self-interpretations of actors themselves, right? So self-interpretations are important, okay, but if you are trying to explain those self-interpretations, right, then you need to go beyond those self-interpretations. Right, etc. Okay. Now that's why, and this is an important point. This is an important point, and that's why I titled that lecture "Specifying Limits." Okay. Taylor is speaking for self-interpretations. Taylor is speaking for a social science modeled on the study of self-interpretations, but also arguing that there is a limit within which that study can proceed, right? as it were. Okay. Now, in other words, the rule or the idea that Taylor is talking about, so that we don't confuse what is to be explained. I mean, I think, please, this is a very subtle distinction between what is to be explained and what is doing the explaining, right? And many of the times, what is doing the explaining, okay, gets confused with that which is to be explained. This happens, and the example that I gave you is about identity politics, but this is true of other realms as well, right? Now, so Taylor is making the point that interpretation involves more than adopting the agent's point of view, right? Okay, the agent's point of view is important, okay, but an interpretive social science goes beyond the agent's point of view. Okay. Now, in fact, according to Taylor, it's a mistake. Okay. I mean, it's a mistake to argue that an interpretation or an interpretive view of social science, okay, I stress the word, it's a mistake that an interpretive social science ignores self-descriptions or self-interpretations altogether. You have to take self-interpretation seriously, right? So it's a mistake to ignore self-interpretations altogether. Okay, and of course you can always, I mean, scientists always say, no, we are not looking at the world from a point of view. We are looking at the world, I mean, as they say, a view from nowhere. We are Archimedean, right, etc. I mean, that science is neutral between languages. Science does not choose this language over others. It's neutral between languages. Now, Taylor is arguing that it is a mistake. An interpretive social science, although it seeks to go beyond the agent's self-interpretation, okay, it should not translate its going beyond as ignoring altogether self-interpretations, right? So you cannot ignore self-descriptions. Yeah.
So can you give me a simpler example for explanation and experiments?
No. See, as a social scientist, you're trying to explain something. I mean, there is some state of affairs in the world that you're trying to explain. How are you going to explain it? Right? Do we explain it? I gave you the example of identity politics. You can say that people are acting that way because they are asserting their caste identity, right? They are affirming their caste identity, right? Etc. But so now when you are trying to explain that caste identity, how did that caste identity get formed? That is what you have to explain. But then to explain that, you assume that caste identity becomes the explanation. Okay? So people act that way because they have that identity, and that identity is that which you want to explain. Now you're confusing what is to be explained with what is doing the explaining.
Sir, can white supremacy the explanandum and ethnocentrism the explanans?
Sorry?
White supremacy as a self-interpretation and terming it as the interpreter terming it as ethnocentrism.
No, for instance, white supremacy is that which you want to explain.
That is the standpoint of the actor. Whites are supreme.
No. Yeah, maybe in the example that you're trying to give me, it could be that. But I'm saying.
I'm calling it as ethnocentrism.
Yes, it is ethnocentric. It is ethnocentric because you assume that the white position is the universal position. That's why it's called supremacist. That's why it's assumed to be supremacist, right? So you claim some universality to what is actually a particular position. Just as there can be a white supremacy, there can also be black supremacy.
So the interpreter takes the position that the argument for white supremacy by the actor is actually an ethnocentrism.
Yeah, it is. See, the point is, there is something more than being ethnocentric here. There is something more than just being ethnocentric here, because it is also claiming, it is not only claiming that white is a superior position, it is also, I mean, it's also, sorry, it's not only claiming that white is a position, it's claiming that it is the supreme position. So it is ethnocentric, but it is also making some kind of a imperialist claim. I mean, to be ethnocentric, you can be ethnocentric, look at the world from your point of view, but say that this is only my point of view. When I say that, no, this is only my point of view, the implications of ethnocentricity are limited. But if you say that my point of view is the point of view, then this is a stronger I mean, if I can use an expression like that, a stronger or a thicker ethnocentricity, I agree with you. It's a thick ethnocentricity. But you can have ethnocentricity in terms of thin terms. That I am looking at the world from my point of view, and I am not saying that my point of view is the point of view that we need to take the world. The white supremacist, I mean, the fact that you call it supremacist implies that it is not only claiming to be a point of view, it's also claiming to be the point of view, right? So there is something stronger in being ethnocentric, and so on. But I mean, just 1 minute. So this idea of what is to be explained and what is doing the explaining, I think I can give you. There can be many. I mean, I'm talking about identity. Any identity claim by actors, you have to explain it. You're trying to explain it, but you cannot use the same identity to explain that identity, right? Instead, you should try to explain why people articulate that identity. What are the other identity claims that are available to them? That are not available, that they reject. So it's consciously thought out, and so on. There can be many examples about, for instance, capital. You are studying capitalism, right? You are trying to explain capitalism, okay? But then, and you have Marxist formulations about the laws of capitalism, so quote unquote the laws and processes of capitalism. Right? Somewhere somebody might argue that Marx is not confusing the two. Marx is, in revealing the laws, he's trying to understand a process, okay, which he has characterized as capitalism, and trying to explain the laws of capitalism through that. So the explanans and the explanandum are kept separate. Okay? And although, of course, you can always say that there are some people who might want to see capitalism everywhere, right? Somebody might say, no, because you are wedded to this analysis of capitalism, you begin to seek the logic of capitalism in every relation that can obtain. There, perhaps these are being confused, right? Of course, somebody might say, no, the logic of capitalism pervades everything. Therefore, can you think about relations which are not free from the logic of capitalism? That's I think there are relations which you can see independent of the logic of capitalism. But if you say that, so Marx himself was sensitive to this distinction. But in the ways in which we may use Marxist theories, sometimes we may confuse the two. Right? Okay. Not may, I think we do confuse the two. Yeah.
Sir, my question is, I am trying to clarify myself.
Sure, please.
Self-interpretation cannot be, hermeneutics should move beyond self-interpretation.
Sure.
That means if you bring in the category of experience into that,
yeah,
you have to contextualize it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but the point is, even if you bring experience into it, see the point, there is something ethnocentric in bringing experience. Because sometimes you may say that this is the only authentic experience, right? I mean, early this month I was in Kolkata giving some lectures, and there was a symposium on Dalit literature. And there were 3 Dalit writers from Bengal, prominent Dalit writers from Bengal, speaking about Dalit literature, right? And paradoxically, each was claiming to be the authentic Dalit voice. All 3 were Dalits, incidentally. And each was telling that your voice is less authentic than mine. Right? No, see the point. No, I mean, in bringing this example, I'm not. I've learned a lot from the Dalit voice, from the theorizing of Dalit experience, etc. I'm not so discounting the value of focusing on experience, but experience as a category many times goes with notions about authenticity. Right? So and there, it becomes a little slippery. I mean, I was partly that's why I'm saying white. I mean, you can say that you can take a white position on the world, you can take a black position on the world, you can take some other universalist position on the world, but so long as there are positions on the world, they are valid. But if you claim that one position, is the position that gains access to the world, then you are maybe making a more excessive claim. So if experience is contextualizing interpretations, then I would ask this question, is this contextualizing as claim about authenticity? Okay? Now, if you claim it's a claim about it, then I might be a little careful, right? If it's a claim about priority, I mean, for instance, women must speak for women's experiences. Dalits must speak for Dalit experiences, right? Proletariat must speak for proletarian experiences. The bourgeois must speak for the bourgeois. They cannot transcend their locations, right? Etc. I mean, I'm willing to grant priority to it. I'm willing to grant priority to that position. That a Dalit has a claim on his or her life, okay, or a woman has a claim on his or her life, I'm willing to give priority, but not authenticity, right? Because authenticity goes with further claims. Any claim of authenticity is not. It is a position which I might, in clarification to her question, said strong ethnocentricity. Right? Etc. Maybe in certain contexts, this strong ethnocentricity may be necessary, but I'm not so sure it needs to be operative in social science context. I mean, we are not politicians. For politicians, perhaps you need to, take a stand, right? I mean, or make certain kinds of polemical claims, etc., in order to harness a certain constituency and so on, right? Okay, so that's why, any other clarifications? So, yeah.
Is it, when you say authenticity, I mean, I have heard in identity, like academician politics, they say, when in the second phase, when you interpret my experience, you are losing like the vital things.
Yeah.
So do you really think there is a problem in this from first to second phase, if it is not the...
Yeah, surely there is a problem. Surely there is a problem, but it's not necessary that it is inevitable. I mean, the presumption that every interpretation is a travesty of an original experience, and I don't think that is necessarily true. Although there is always that possibility, okay, and therefore we need to be up on our feet, jogging our heads, so to say, as well, in trying to render. I mean, this has to do with for instance, translating a text. I mean, when you take a word in one language and translate it in another language, etc. I mean, does the translated word carry the meaning of the original word? It's always an open issue. Okay, and there can be debates about it. okay, etc. Okay, and I mean, in fact, I might. No, I don't think I should allow myself that. I would actually experiment with a word. I have a translation of a word, but no, I think that will be too. Maybe we can talk about it some other context. Yeah.
Sir, recently Uday Kumar has published
Yeah.
a book, Writing
The
First
self,
Person.
yeah.
Actually, this self-writing,
Yeah. Yeah.
how it comes into it?
Yeah. Yeah. No, see, the point is, yes, I'm willing to, there is a self-writing which is possible, right? And I'm willing to grant something in that mode called as self-writing. For instance, biography. I mean, you're right, or autobiography. I mean, autobiography is some form of self-writing, although there are different forms of autobiographies. Right, what Uday looks at is a form of self-writing which comes from Kumaran, Assam, and others, right? And the argument is that form of self-writing, okay, is something more formative than other forms of writing or other forms of autobiographical writing, okay? But that's an important claim, and it's up to us to test those waters, right? I'm not. I mean, my knowledge of the primary languages, at least in this case, Malayalam, is limited, etc. So it would be not right on my part to say whether this form of writing has something unique to it, right? Kumaran Assam's form of writing has something unique to it, which are not there in other forms of auto writing or self-writing or autobiography and so on. But that's an academic discourse, and there have been critical engagements with Uday Kumar's work, and I'm quite aware of some of those lines of work which might be there. But please note, I mean, somebody might ask, why are we puzzling over these questions? I mean, and in fact, the second level of my lecture, will also traverse another language. So that's why in trying to speak about specifying the limits of the hermeneutic, one is not saying that the social science language is only built around hermeneutical languages, right? That's why, is there something, I mean, the beyond the agent? Please note this. Taylor's claim is within hermeneutics, is within an interpretive social science which argues that you should take the agent seriously, but you cannot just work with what agents say, right? That's why interpretation involves something more than adopting the agent's point of view, right? Etc. Okay. So in other words, understanding something, I mean, this is important, understanding something, okay, cannot simply mean adopting his or her point of view, right? Etc. That's why since you gave the example of Uday's writing, I think, look, there is a scholarly resonance on that writing, right? You have the primary writing, and you also have the scholarly spin that Uday Kumar is bringing to that. And I think both the original text, how it is to be read, how it is to be interpreted, and what Uday is doing is bringing one axis of interpretation into that text. Surely there are other interpretations, but Uday's claim would be that, and I think this would be the claim of any scholar working off primary text, that my interpretation or this interpretation is more it's more robust, not authentic, more robust, more intricate than other interpretations. And okay, but surely Uday will never make the claim that his reading is more authentic, right? Or even if he makes that claim, it will be seen as a relative to other readings. other readings don't do justice to Kumaran Asan's writings. Okay, and if doing justice is doing justice to a writing is exceeding to the voice, doing justice to the voice of a writing, right? Then somebody might say, exceeding to the voice is to get into the authenticity of that voice. Okay, getting a measure of the authenticity of that voice. But then getting a measure of the authenticity of that voice is not, you're not using that authenticity to deny other authenticities. That becomes strong ethnocentricity. You can have authenticity. So that's why my remarks against authenticity should not be seen as a kind of a, claim that all claims about authenticity are invalid. I mean, if it is contextualized, right, relativized to a certain space of discourse, then perhaps it can make meaning, right? Okay, so understanding, okay, cannot mean something more than adopting an agent's point of view. Okay, now, I mean, what is the problem that Taylor is highlighting here for us, right? What is the issue that Taylor is trying to highlight for us? Okay, now, he is definitely not saying that you should not take self-descriptions seriously. He's not saying that. Of course, you have to take self-description seriously. Okay, although in taking self-description seriously, this does not amount to making sense, right? Okay, to make sense of something, to interpret something, is to do more than just taking self-descriptions seriously, right? Etc. Okay, now Taylor points that that's why he's saying you have to take self-descriptions seriously, but these self-descriptions could be mistaken. People may be ignorant. People may willfully mislead or willfully, please, willfully, not out of false consciousness or not out of ignorance or simplicity, mislead, willfully mislead and give an interpretation of their action. Okay, now, in other words, self-descriptions are capable of being illusions. They could be illusionary. Okay, they could be confused. Okay, they could be, the actors could be misinformed. Okay, they're not deliberately trying to mislead you. They are misinformed about possibilities and so on. Okay, now so even as an interpretive social science, cannot bypass the agent's understanding. It cannot bypass the agent's understanding. Okay, there is always the possibility that the agent's understanding is incomplete. It's uninformed, or or ignorant, or something of that kind. Okay, now, so that's why he's saying, if social science has to identify its explanandum, that which is to be explained, okay, then it has to take the self-descriptions of actors seriously. So the first act of social science in trying to explain something or finding what it wants to explain, right, is to take the agent's self-description seriously, right? But it must also seek to go beyond. Because if that which is sought to be explained, then you have to think about categories for explaining it, the explanants. And it cannot be on the same terms. That's why, because actors could be, they may try to mislead you, or they may be uninformed about their actions. They may be ignorant about their actions, okay, etc. Right, and so on. Okay, now, that's why Taylor is arguing that you cannot assimilate interpretation, self-interpretation, okay, to adopting the agent's point of view. There is more to interpretive social science than adopting the agent's point of view, right? And it is doing more than adopting the agent's point of view, which enables us to avoid this confusion between what is to be explained, okay, what is the phenomena that is to be explained, and what is doing the explaining. I mean, doing the explaining, the categories you bring, the concepts you bring, the explanatory moves that you make, and so on, right? And please note, that's why I'm keen whenever I interact, I mean, with my research students, even at the first day of their research, I would tell them, think with your thesis. Not only think with your problem, but think with your thesis, right? I mean, why? Because please note, your thinking also has to be staged. You know, you have to stage your thinking. The problem has to be staged. It has to be presented, right? It has to be presented. Now, the thesis is a format of presentation. Okay, how do you go about it? Where do you begin, right? I mean, there must be a beginning, middle, and end to anything. I mean, if you, of course, somebody might say, no, there is more than beginning, middle, and end, etc. But if you accept that there is in anything a beginning, middle, and end, then the beginning must be meaningful. There must be the middle must have a link with the beginning, okay, and the end must link up the two, right? Where to begin? That's your call. That's how you distinguish one research from another's. I may begin from somewhere, somebody else may begin from somewhere else with the same problem, right? But there is a structure, okay. And I think some of what I'm trying to highlight through this is that if you take a hermeneutic social science seriously, right, or a social science modeled on hermeneutics seriously, working off contextualized self-interpretation seriously, then there is always the possibility of confusing what is to be explained, okay, and what is doing the explaining. And Taylor is saying this is something that we need to be conscious. Incidentally, this is a point made by even scientists. Okay, but of course, most of us, in social science, we have a very caricatural view of science. I mean, because we want to invent our own identity as separate, so we always caricature the scientists. But please note, I mean, there is an extremely interesting world to even hard science, right? I always remind students, we talk to the dullest scientists and get, just as there can be dull social scientists, there can also be dull scientists, right? Just as there can be very interesting social science, there can also be very interesting science. And I think somewhere along the way, if we have to work with our images of social science, then you have to interact with the most interesting ones. In fact, that's why I make a distinction between sociology and sociologists, right? Or history and historians. Okay, doing history or doing literature, doing political science and political scientists, right? And these are various categories. Now, that's why it should be evident that Taylor is setting aside two common misunderstandings about interpretive social science, right? Okay, he's and just pushing a little more ahead, okay, that he's in making these remarks, okay, that yes, interpretive social science works off self-interpretations, but goes beyond self-interpretations, right? Going beyond enables us not to confuse the exponent and the exponents, right? that is always a possibility of confusing the two in interpretive social science. I think this is true even of non-interpretive social science, right? Okay, but the problem becomes even more self-evident in an interpretive social science where these two can get confused. And Taylor is saying we need to be alert to that. The further claim, and I'm just pushing one more step, is that according to Taylor, there are two common misapprehensions about an interpretive or a hermeneutic social science. Okay, one, the first misapprehension, common misapprehension, okay, is that interpretation demands that to interpret you have to empathize with somebody else. That interpretation demands empathy, right? Which is true, absolutely. If you want to interpret something, I'm just taking Uday Kumar's example because the example was articulated. Whatever Uday might say in terms of a critical understanding of Kumaran Asan's writings, he also empathizes with that subject, right? Etc. So interpretation demands empathy. Okay, empathy with our subjects. Okay, but then Taylor points out that there is more than just empathy involved. That's why it's a misapprehension, right? Empathy, may certainly be useful in coming to have the understanding that we seek. So empathy is important, but empathy only identifies the understanding that we seek. It does not explain the understanding itself. What does understanding something consist in? You cannot deliver into it through empathy, right? Etc. That's why he points out that, for instance, he says, Taylor makes the point, science is also a form of discourse, right? Social science is a form of discourse. Science also is a form of discourse. And in any science, right, as a form of discourse, we want an account of a situation, we want an account, of a situation which sets out the significance of that situation. In any situation there are actions involved, and a lot of science or social science and science is about describing the significance of those situations, right? Now, in other words, Taylor is saying, that's why he's saying that empathy is not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient, right? So if you want to know what understanding consists in, then you have to go beyond empathy, right? Etc. And in fact, social science or even any form of science must also attend to, the language in which it is delivering into that situation. What is the language? The right language, you can make this clear. In the sense that you're not only trying to describe the situation, what is going on, you're also trying to understand the significance of that situation for the actors who are involved in it, right? Etc. In fact, he uses a technical word for this, that it's important for social science to develop what Taylor calls a language of perspicuous contrast. This is a technical word. Language of perspicuous, C-U-O-U-S, perspicuous contrast. A language of perspicuous contrast, to make things clearer, right? That you're not only addressing a situation, you're also trying to understand the significance, the meanings that are part of that situation. So social science or interpretive social science also needs to invest in the right language in which to communicate that situation that it is seeking to describe, right? And for Taylor, it is the language of perspicuous contrast that can deliver into that. I will speak about it presently, okay? But the second misapprehension, okay, that Taylor talks about is that, I mean, the second misapprehension is something that we have talked about earlier, okay, that understanding the agent, okay, involves adopting his or her point of view, okay, in fact, Taylor says, if you reduce social science just to actors' point of view, you're making social science too dull, too unilluminating, right? In fact, even impossible. I mean, so there is more to social science than just taking the actor's point of view seriously, right? Etc. Of course, you need to work with the actor's point of view, but social science is not just about articulating the point of view of actors. If it is just articulating the point of view of actors, then it is actually confusing the explanandum and the explanans. What is to be explained and what is doing the explaining, right? Now, that's why, let me speak a little about this language of perspicuous contrast that Taylor recommends as the language of hermeneutic social science or an interpretive social science, right? So clearly you need to go beyond the agent's point of view, and Taylor uses, he makes a reference to another philosopher, Gadamer. I mean, in fact, Gadamer is a very interesting philosopher, okay? And Gadamer speaks about fusion of horizons. Fusion, okay, of horizons. I mean, it's a wonderful word. I mean, the fusion of horizons. G-A-D-A-M-E-R. Hans George Gadamer. Okay. In fact, a lot of historians also have drawn a lot of inspiration from Gadamer's work, right? But I'm not going to, I mean, looking at only Taylor. That's why I thought I'll restrict my lecture to one figure. And please note, the figure is interesting because he opens up a whole lot of questions for our purposes. That's the reason why I focused on Charles Taylor. I mean, I could well be speaking about Gadamer as well, but I mean, that's just pushing names into people's minds. I mean, the more important is the core ideas. Okay, so Taylor borrows from Gadamer the idea of the fusion. Gadamer spoke of the fusion of horizons. Okay, interpretation as involving the fusion of horizons. That's why, I mean, if you go back to the language of first person, second person, and third person, right? Can we have a fusion of these three ways of seeing the world, from the first person point of view, from the second person point of view, and the third person point of view? That's a fusion of horizons. Although a first person point of view is not a fusion of horizons, or only a second person point of view is not a fusion of horizons, okay, etc. But Taylor uses Gadamer's language or idea of fusion of horizons to develop this language of perspicuous contrast. Okay, the language of perspicuous contrast, and the language which Taylor believes is the language that social science must take seriously, which works off agent self-interpretations but does not reduce interpretations to the agent's point of view. Okay, Now, in fact, in fact, Taylor makes the point that, and I'm speaking about the language of perspicuous contrast. Okay, and I've set up a background for this. Okay, for why Taylor is saying that's the language social science needs to take forward, or a more humanity-centered social science, because I'm told a lot of economists also in this audience. Although please note there are some very interesting, in fact my second lecture will actually bear a lot on contributions by methodologically sensitive economists on these remarks and so on. And they cannot be making those remarks without opening out to this horizon of questions, right? So there is a certain kind of sensitivity which I think even economics and economists can be bringing to the kind of facts about the world that are important. Okay, so let me just make a set of concluding observations on the language of perspicuous contrast. Okay, note the remarks that I've already made, and I'm repeating this just for for currency. Okay, that an interpretive social science cannot bypass the agent's self-understanding. It cannot bypass, but it cannot be reduced only to agent self-understanding. So it has to take agent self-understanding as a point of departure and go beyond, which is there. Okay. In fact, this going beyond will enable, according to Taylor, a movement beyond ethnocentricity. Okay, a movement beyond ethnocentricity. Right? Because I mean, and what is ethnocentricity? It's a way of understanding one culture, according to the categories of another culture. Right? When I use my standards to assess others, I'm being ethnocentric. When I use one culture, X culture, to assess other cultures, one is also being ethnocentric, right? As it were. Okay. So Taylor is pointing out that one clear safeguard against ethnocentricity, okay, is taking agent self-understanding seriously, but not reducing social science to agent self-understanding. Okay. In fact, if you read the essay, there is a context in which Taylor outlines these remarks. I mean, he's also negotiating with a very influential position in social science, which argues that taking the actors seriously is the be-all and end-all of social science. Right? There is a wonderful work of Peter Winch called "The Idea of Social Science." Okay. In fact, the title of the book is called "The Idea of Social Science and Its Relation to Philosophy." Right? And Taylor is, in a sense, making these remarks against that position, right? Etc. Okay. Now, but then, okay. So Taylor also recognizes that to be doing interpretive social science is you are not assuming the neutrality of languages. No language is neutral. Every language is a language delivered from somewhere, right? So there is no neutral language from which you can look at the world, right? Etc. Okay. Now, but then, if you're trying to go beyond people's understanding, what is this beyond? Is this neutral language? I mean, is this movement beyond a movement towards neutrality? Now, Taylor will make, and that's why he uses the language of perspicuous contrast. Now, please note, I'm repeating these claims, but I'm repeating it just to reinforce this point about perspicuous contrast, because you cannot understand the language of perspicuous contrast without reiterating the kind of claims that we have been making all through the lecture, right? That's why it's called specifying limits. I mean, okay, and I think one of the things that we social scientists need to understand is that that when claims are made, when we go making claims, we should also understand the limits within which those claims are made. In fact, I'm fond of saying this: if you want to think for something, you have to think against it. I mean, somebody might say this is dialectics. No, this is not dialectics, definitely not dialectics, etc. I mean, if you want to think for somebody, you have to think against that somebody. I mean, it is necessary that if you want to be for something, I mean, thinking for and against an idea is the only way in which you can redeem ideas. This is part of the language of perspicuous contrast. Now Taylor points out, okay, I mean, that in moving beyond, I mean, are we being committed to ethnocentricity? I mean, that which we are trying to avoid. Okay, this moving beyond the agent's self-understanding may actually imply another form of ethnocentricity. And Taylor reminds us, no, this is not necessarily the case, right? It's so even as you move beyond the agent's self-understanding, you're not searching for some neutral language. Okay, you are actually affirming something else. Okay, I mean, to go beyond the agent's self-understanding is not necessarily being committed to ethnocentricity. And this is important, and Taylor recognizes that there is always that charge you can bring to go beyond the actor. Okay, but Taylor says to go beyond the actor is not necessarily, this is important, not necessarily to be authentic. I sound like a lawyer maybe, you know, because lawyers are always conscious about, you know, whether some necessity is a logical necessity or a real necessity or a, I mean, please note in law, and that's one of my areas of work, that's why I'm moving to constitutional jurisprudence, is possibly basically this, although one of my deep regrets of all this journey that I've had, but now it's too late, that I never acquired a law degree. I should have acquired a law degree, and perhaps, you know, also maybe thought of an alternative career in law apart from academics. I mean, so the language of perspicuous contrast, okay, that Taylor is arguing for, okay, is part of this, where it considers the many possibilities that are can be obtaining in any given state of affairs, and then works through them to the language of perspicuous contrast. Okay. In fact, I mean, you can read the essay Understanding an Ethnocentricity in Volume 2 of his philosophical papers to understand this, right? Okay, I mean, so a language of perspicuous contrast is a language which considers any form of life, okay, and situates that form of life in other forms of life that are available to it, right? And so it sees the variety of forms of life, okay, as alternative possibilities. Each form of life is an alternative possibility, right, etc. So it's not so in seeking to go beyond something, right, you are not necessarily repudiating it and saying that that form of life that you're seeking to go beyond is restricted or narrow, etc. That's why he's arguing that there is a larger process, and that's why he says that you cannot understand the language of perspicuous contrast, that is the language for an interpretive social science, outside of Gadamer's claims about the fusion of horizons, right? Okay. Now, in fact, so the simple adoption of the agent's point of view, okay, is not enough. That's why let's go back to our introductory overture in the light of some of the questions that you had in the beginning, although that was not what I had in mind, but it was an important clarification, and perhaps when I deliver this lecture in another audience, maybe I will introduce this and acknowledge this audience for this clarity that I have brought to this about the first person point of view, the second person point of view, and the third person point of view. Incidentally, there are philosophies which argue that only the first person point of view is to be taken seriously. There are some who say no, the first person point of view is important, but no, you should take the second person point of view more seriously. And there are of course others who say no, the first person point of view, the second person point of view, the third person point of view is more. Now the fusion of horizons cannot come by arrogating each or one of those claims. right? It's only when you have a fusion of horizons of the first person, the second person, and the third person that perhaps you can have a more credible and a more robust social science. Okay, so so is there any clarifications? And then we should have a break now. I think you're going to listen to another lecture from me. Thank you very much. But we can always, if there are questions, you can always bring it in the second lecture. Right.